All right, Unit 5. It is time to start making plans for our first big essay this semester. Semester was a hard word to say. So you are going to be comparing the settings of two short stories. We've been reading short stories off and on over the last few weeks, in addition to the writing that we've been doing on To Build a Fire and then your song analysis essay. So hopefully you've been reading those short stories that I've given you as supplemental reading. But even if you haven't, you can catch up pretty quickly because they are short stories. So make sure that you read The Story of an Hour, which is has a lot of irony in it. It's very, very short. Make sure you read The Cask of Amontillado, which is an Edgar Allan Poe short story, so you know it's going to be a little dark and spooky. The Gift of the Magi, which also has some really great irony in it, and the setting is a very interesting addition to the information that you'll find in that short story. And of course, To Build a Fire, which I know that you've read because you wrote about it last week. So you're going to be comparing the settings of these stories and how that setting affects the characters, the plot, and the conflict of the story. And you can also add information about the atmosphere and how that sets a general tone and how the setting adds to that tone and that atmosphere and how the characters interact with each other. And I've given you some sample outlines to use. This week we are just writing an outline. Next week we will write our rough draft, and then in Unit 7 you will submit your final draft for your first big essay for the semester. And I call this one big because we spend a lot of time on it, and it's going to end up being longer than the essays that we've written in the past. And it has to have 4 or 5 very carefully planned paragraphs. And you have to use information from the stories as evidence. And of course, you have to use segues. And those types of things are objectives for writing and for MLA that I want you to review this week. And that's also part of your discussion. So when you do your discussion this week, you're going to be asked to sort of practice some of those MLA objectives and some of those writing objectives that some of us have had a little trouble with. So you're going to choose which sample outline to use. One of them uses 4 paragraphs, this one, and then one of them uses 5 paragraphs. And really, it's just a matter of choice. If you want to focus on, say, the gift of the Magi in paragraph 2, which is your body paragraph 1, and then just focus on to build a fire in paragraph 3, then you can do that. Or if you want to go down here and talk about how the setting affects the gift of the Magi and how it affects to build a fire, or how the setting affects the characters in the gift of the Magi, and then again how it affects the characters in to build a fire, and then for your last paragraph how the setting affects the conflict in the gift of the Magi and how it affects the conflict in to build a fire. So for this outline you'll go point by point. So really, whichever one you like, whichever one makes the most sense to you, whichever one you prefer is really the one that you can choose for this essay. So you can choose the 4-paragraph essay or the 5-paragraph essay. It's up to you. Either way, your outline should have about 30 lines. I could spend an entire class teaching you how to write a formal outline. And some of your college professors may eventually want you to write a formal outline. They have Roman numerals and numbers and letters, and everything goes in a specific place. But they really don't teach you very much except for how to write an outline. So for that reason, I'd rather you do an informal outline. If you just already know how to do an outline, a very formal one, and you'd like to do it that way, you can. But you don't have to do that for this assignment. I really just want to know what your plan is for your essay. So just tell me 5 or so parts of each paragraph that you intend to discuss, and be specific. Be very specific. So don't just put introduction, hook, background information, thesis statement. That is not at all specific enough. You need to say hook. For my hook, I'm going to discuss other famous settings, such as Hogwarts in Harry Potter, and how people are aware of very famous settings in literature. So that could be an example of a hook. And then for my background information, I'm going to tell the titles of both of the stories and who wrote them. And then I'm going to explain how the conflict and the characters and what is the other point we said we were going to use? Conflict, characters, and plot are affected in a thesis statement. So really explain to me what you're going to put in that introduction. So your hook, your background information, and these are just suggestions. You might choose to put something else. You probably do want to use a hook and background information, but the background information that you use is up to you. For example, if you discover that the author was an actual person who lived up in the snowy Yukon areas, then that might be information that's interesting to the reader. So background information including, for example, the titles and the authors, and possibly background information about those people and even why they might have chosen the title. So possibly background info about authors. And then, of course, an explanation of how conflict, how conflict, plot, and characters are affected by the settings. Okay? And that's going to be a real challenge, that thesis statement. And we'll probably work on thesis statements for your discussion next week. So this is just an example of what you could put in your outline. Paragraph 2, how setting affects the plot of To Build a Fire, what your topic sentence is. Here's an example of a topic sentence. The setting of To Build a Fire, which is the snowy Yukon, plays a huge part in the story. So that's a good topic sentence. That tells us what this paragraph is going to be about. It's almost as if the setting is another character. It has such a strong influence. So in that paragraph, I'm also going to discuss the plot, and then you would sort of give a summary of the plot and tell how the setting affects it. And the characters, tell who they are, how does setting affect them, and then conflict, what happens, how does the setting affect that. And these are things that you're actually going to explain. You're going to say, okay, for conflict, the setting is the snowy Yukon, and that creates many different forms of conflict for both the man and the dog, because the setting creates a very dangerous place for them both to be. So really explain that information. You don't have to do it in complete sentences or anything. A topic outline is fine. But as you continue, so for paragraph 3, if you were doing the 4-paragraph outline, then paragraph 3 would be how setting affects another story that you're choosing. Let's say you chose, Cask of Amontillado. How setting affects Cask of Amontillado. Go ahead and write a good topic sentence. The catacombs of Paris are perfect setting for the dark and spooky events and characters in Cask of Amontillado. And then maybe explain what the catacombs are. Because I'm going to bet when you first read that, you were like, what the heck is a catacomb? And had to look it up. I know I did. All right, and then we go to, just like we did before, the plot. How is the plot affected? The characters. How are the characters affected by this setting? And the conflict. How is the conflict affected by this setting? And then lastly, of course, a conclusion. Conclusions are always tricky to write because you really don't feel like you don't really know what to say sometimes. Just whatever you do, don't put in conclusion. We can see that it's your last paragraph. You don't have to say in conclusion. We know that you're concluding, so don't say in conclusion. It's just a rather elementary thing to do. So sometimes your concluding paragraph is almost like a mirrored version of your introductory paragraph. So again, don't use that. So for your conclusion, you might restate what you discovered in how setting affects the characters, plot, and conflict. And maybe note that setting is, or the author's choice of setting is very important to a story, and that sort of thing. Basically have a discussion in your mind about how setting is important, how it's important to these particular works, and why it's so important for an author to think about what setting they're choosing for a specific work and how it might be different, how the work and the characters and the conflicts might be different if the setting were in a completely different place. For example, in using Harry Potter as an example again, if we had set Harry Potter in, Southern Alabama in the United States, we probably wouldn't have quite the amount of charm that we have in England, where there's so many old magical things, just mostly because the country is so much older. So again, I'm just sort of brainstorming and thinking if things are right. And that's really all your plan and your outline are. It's kind of weird because you're just letting your mind think of all the different possibilities that you could talk about for setting and then discussing those in your outline. So just put as much information in there as you can, and then we'll start to sort of whittle that down and condense that down into a good rough draft next week, okay? All right, so this was an example of the four paragraph outline example, and it's not finished. I didn't really finish it. I didn't want to bore you by completing the whole thing, and I also didn't really want to give you the opportunity to steal some of my ideas, which you would do accidentally because they're probably some of the same ideas that you've had. So if you do end up using another source for this essay, which I really don't encourage you to do, because I'd like to know that this information came from your own conclusions and your own brain. But if you do end up using another source, make sure it is a good source. Do not use GradeSaver, Essay Pro, SparkNotes, Clips Notes, anything like that. Don't use any of those because those are not proper college sources. They're good sources if you just don't understand something. So it's good to read those if you're completely confused about one of these stories, but don't use them as sources or essay ideas. Don't use them as sources for your essay, and don't use them as ideas to write in your essay. Just use them to help you understand the literature so that you can form your own ideas, okay? All right, let's add a word count. Let's say for your rough draft, which we're not really writing until next week, but for your rough draft, let's say we're probably going to have to do 700 to 1,500 words. That's a big amount of space because I'm not sure how many words you're going to need. But I think you're going to at least need 700 because you're comparing two works of literature, and that's going to take up a lot of space. So let's do 700 to 1,500 words, okay? And as always, please write in third person. I know that in the instructions, I told you that you can tell me, what you've discovered. So explain, like I said, restate what you've discovered and how setting affects the character's plot and conflict. But you still don't have to say, I discovered. You can say, setting, you don't have to say, I discovered that setting is extremely important to the plot of a story. You can simply say, setting is extremely important to the plot of a story. You can just completely leave out I discovered, or I found out, or I realized that. Just leave all that out and write strictly in third person. It makes your writing sound more formal, and it's just a good habit to get into, writing in third person so that your writing sounds more formal. All right, if you have any questions, let me know. I hope that this video was helpful. And as always, please reach out to me if you have questions. I have so many of you who submit work, and then when I say, hey, you really didn't quite understand this, you were like, yeah, I didn't know what to do. Like, email me, send me a message in VCamp. I will usually get back to you within 24 hours. And I know that can be a pain, but if you If you'll email me in the evenings, or not email, send me a message through VCamp in the evenings, then I'll usually get to you even faster because I normally check my email after rehearsal. I have theater rehearsal, but after that, after 6 o'clock, I'll check my messages and get back to you ASAP. And if it's something pressing or you really need help right now, you can always send me a text message, and I'll put that information in here as well. All right, have a great week. Let me know if you need help.